the Odyssey in 20 days and then immediately watched Christopher Nolan's film, and here's what will shock you. Hi, I'm Jivika. I'm a film enthusiast, TV enthusiast, book enthusiast, everything. And The Odyssey is actually a very special project to me. If you've been following along on my series of actually reading it, which you can find on my TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, The Odyssey was a project that I took in high school. I studied it extensively. I applied Lacan's mirror theories to it. I was very into it. And to see one of the greatest filmmakers and directors of all time turn a project so dear to me into a film that I could watch, best believe I was excited. Now, as you obviously know, I decided to read The Odyssey again right before watching the film. And for someone who was going into it with this sort of like analytical purpose, I think it was a good idea. And I think it was especially a good idea to do it again since being in high school, because your girl has grown, okay, mentally and physically. So this little video will just be my thoughts, my analyses, and my ideas that I took from the film, having also read The Odyssey just before. And let me tell you something, as an English nerd, best believe this video is going to be coherent because I have it all typed up here, and you will be able to find my ideas on my Substack. I will just say though, there will be some ideas exclusive to this video only, so make sure you watch till the end. But I have no gripes with you if you are a reading person. You'll be able to find my essay on my Substack. Now, let me just put in a disclaimer here. I am not going to be discussing the casting at all. I feel like there's been plenty of discussions around that. And I don't really want to use my platform to facilitate potential racist and misogynist comments. So if you feel that your major gripe with the film is the casting, I think we need to get a grip. So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to tell you 3 things I liked about the film, 3 things I disliked about the film, and then my general interpretations of the film alongside my interpretations of Homer's Odyssey, because the two are vastly different. Like, I'll definitely touch on this more, but there are actually so many differences that Nolan made that I didn't actually expect, because I went into it thinking it's going to be like a frame by frame retelling. And I'm kind of glad it wasn't. All right, let's do this. So starting off with the 3 things that I liked, and coming in at number 3 was Sinon's character. And I will talk about this more in my interpretation section because I think it is actually quite central to Odysseus's journey. But I really enjoyed his character, and he actually isn't in Homer's epic, and I just think it was a clever inclusion. So number 2 was Athena appearing as somebody that Odysseus saw at Troy. I thought this was very clever, and I thought it was a good way of showing how personalized it is, that the way gods come and appear in disguise to humans in Greek mythology. Because when we generally hear about gods being in disguise, we don't really know much about it, and we don't really know the importance of that disguise. And I think it was a great way of really humanizing Odysseus, which is going to be the core of my interpretation. And coming in at number 1, something which honestly has nothing to do with Odysseus, but is probably one of my favorite parts of the film, the aura, the absolute fucking aura of Agamemnon. Let me tell you something. If I'm that actor, Ben, I think it is, I'm not taking that helmet off, let me tell you. The way that when the walls of Troy open and he just marches in, he just walks through Troy with that, everyone else is fighting, pillaging, screaming for their lives, this man calmly walking through, the absolute aura. And actually, it's Agamemnon on the poster, which is what I painted on my shirt. And yes, I'm going to find many excuses to refer to the hand-painted shirt that I made. But yeah, aura from that guy. Amazing scenes, amazing costuming, amazing placement, just everything with Agamemnon. And I know we're not supposed to like him. I know he's kind of shit in terms of the actual action and character, but the aura on that man. And now coming to the 3 things that I disliked, because of course it's not going to be a 100% perfect film, and these are just things that I sort of took gripes with. Coming in at number 3 was how many times the phrase Zeus's law was mentioned. I know that's what it is, but I'm pretty sure it has a name. I think it's Xenia. I got that from the TED Ed video. Watch the TED Ed video, guys. But just the way that they said it so many times, and I appreciate and understand that Nolan's whole point in the American accents of the contemporary language was to make it more palatable, and have more of a focus on the meaning of the words than trying to be wrapped up in these elegant, flowery terms. I get that that was the point, but I think specifically with something as powerful and central to the story as Zeus's law and hospitality in sort of a Homeric sense, I think it was just a bit odd having it be said so many times, because Zeus's law, I don't know why, just to me it just sounded so limp. Maybe I'm just used to hearing Xenia from the TED Ed video. and then that's why. But that's number 3. Number 2 is, again, and this is a very personal thing, and this could very well just be the intention of Nolan not matching with my expectations, is that there was a couple of things from Homer's Odyssey that I found hilarious, and it just wasn't in the film. Like, everyone's talked about the Cyclops nobody is attacking me scene, but I also found very funny, which I also expressed in my little like short video of recapping the book, is when Eurycleia recognizes that Odysseus is Odysseus because of the scar on his leg. Odysseus is just like, shut up, woman, don't say anything, you're gonna ruin the plan. I found that so funny to me, because it's like we're coming to the big climax and it could all be ruined just because one old woman said something. But then in the film, he kind of just shakes his head very gravely, and it's like this like understanding. So this, like, there wasn't just any like main funny moments in the film, and again, to be fair, this is like a Greek epic, there's going to be tragedy, so I don't think Nolan was going into it trying to add comedic moments, but just because I read it so recently, having watched the film, and I found parts of it funny, I kind of wanted some funny bits in there. And coming in at number 1, Telemachus's armor. It just looked so flat, and I watched the little like behind the scenes documentary thing that they made, and they were talking about how the costuming, like the whole point of it was that it was very 3-dimensional and textural, which I can definitely see that in a lot of the other costumes, like the Lystragonians metal like armor thing that like looked real, it looked 3D, but Telemachus's armor, like, it looked like it was silicon or like rubber or something, which it very well may have been, but it just looked so flat and it didn't look very metallic, and I just thought he looked so silly in it. So that's my number 1 gripe. Telemachus's armor. Get the boy in something a bit stronger. Or maybe that's his like training wheels armor. Like, you're not ready for the big game yet, son. You get rubber, flat-looking armor for now. And now we get to my favorite bit, the interpretation. And boy, do I have a lot. Now, I'm going to start off with things that aren't central to Odysseus's journey, because I think Nolan's film actually very much focused purely on Odysseus. So I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'm going to talk about Odysseus's journey. So starting off with Penelope. In the epic, Penelope is very frozen and very numb, and she is found to be weeping all the time, and her belief in Odysseus coming back is being whittled away. And that's not to say that that's an inaccurate or invalid representation of grief and loss, because it can very much feel like you're being frozen in place to kind of deny the reality of someone being taken away. But I very much appreciated Anne Hathaway's portrayal of Penelope with anger, with rage. Something had been taken away from her, and the rage comes from not knowing, you know? With him being a soldier, there's an honor in him dying in battle and giving himself to the Trojan war and the Achaean cause. And I'm sure that while she would have still gone through the grief of losing her husband in death, there would have been some sort of solace, I guess, in a sense of that he did something for like the greater cause or a bigger image. But just not knowing what's happening, it's such an infuriating thing, like letting grief and like loss aside. Not knowing is on a very basic humanity level. It's a danger to our like sense of survival, and anger and like generally aversive emotions is what like puts us into drive, like our fight or flight. And I'm a neuroscience major, so trust me on this. Aversive emotions really get to us and lock in there, and that's why it's sometimes hard to get rid of aversive emotion linked memories. To an extent, I appreciated Penelope's outburst at Telemachus, but I will say I think that there should have been a couple more moments where Penelope and Telemachus were like more embracing, because in the epic they are very much a duo and they are very much like together. And I didn't really see that in the film, but I think it is down to the fact that Penelope is more fueled by anger due to the unknown, rather than sadness. I think this is a very relevant sort of view on female emotion, because obviously Nolan is making this film and like releasing this film in a postmodern era. Some would argue a postmodern era where a general population has a wider idea of what women express themselves as. And anger, like female rage, we hear that a lot in media. So it was just nice. It was just refreshing to see that portrayed. Then coming to Telemachus. Now, in the epic, Telemachus is a lot more bold by the end of it than in the film, which I thought was an interesting take. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I did watch the film last night, so I'm still sort of reeling in it. But Telemachus in the Greek epic, like in Homer's version, by the end, when the suitors are starting off with the whole like axe arrow like challenge, one of the suitors he attempts to throw something at Odysseus, and he throws it, but Odysseus dodges out of the way, and Telemachus very like calmly and boldly just says, "Oh, I'm glad that you missed that, because if you had actually hit him, because he just said, I need you to treat this man with respect, Homeric hospitality, Zeus's law. I'm so glad that you missed him, because if you did actually hit him, I would have you speared right there and then your father would have to bury you instead of celebrating that you could possibly be married to my mother. So run along." It's such a power move, like big balls. Telemachus has turned up. But in the film, he kind of just like shouted like, "Enough!" And like, that was it. There wasn't any like snappy moments. I will appreciate though at the start, at the start, yes, he has that sort of back and forth with Antinous, and then somewhere towards like in the second half, he had that thing where he's just like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll have enough of food for this stranger. Hopefully, hopefully this guy hasn't munched it all up." Something like that. I do appreciate things like that, but I kind of wanted more of those quips from Telemachus. Now, speaking more about Telemachus's journey, he kind of goes on his own little odyssey because, and this also happens in the film as well because it's quite a central point. He goes to Sparta and he meets with Menelaus to ask for information. And he goes with Mentor, which is a form that Athena takes to go with Telemachus and guide him. And he's kind of just like, "I'm a boy, I don't know how to talk to a king yet." And they have the same thing happen in the film, which I did appreciate because, as the name suggests, Mentor, Athena really guides him to find his voice and find his place in the legacy of Odysseus as his son, as the next ruler of Ithaca. A big change that they did in Telemachus's journey is that in Homer's epic, Telemachus comes back home to Eumaeus's like cottage and meets Odysseus as a beggar there. And Odysseus like gets up and he's like, "Oh my god, my son." And Telemachus doesn't recognize him and is just like, "Sit down, stranger. You don't need to get up for me. It's all good. We're all Gucci, okay? Eumaeus, what's up? Here's the intel, blah, 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 blah." Having finished that journey and found his voice speaking to the king and finding this information and coming back, he finds himself. He finds that confidence, that assurance in himself, which is what the point of an odyssey or a journey really is. It's to forge this identity and who you are. But in the film, there's like a plot to, well, there was obviously the plot to end Telemachus from the suitors in both the epic and the film, but in the film that manifests into some of the suitors going and like ambushing Telemachus. But before they can do that, Odysseus as the beggar makes his way to where Telemachus is and kind of saves him from that. So in doing that, they added in some more of that father-son bonding time, which was kind of absent from the epic, because Athena wanted him to continue keeping his disguise and not reveal himself yet, because, and I will talk about this more later, but to let Telemachus and let Odysseus both grow in their separate ways first before coming together. So it was nice to see that father-son relationship happen in the film. However, in doing so, it kind of took away a little bit from Telemachus becoming who he is. And so by the end of the film, when Telemachus like is the king of Ithaca and Penelope and Odysseus sail away, it kind of felt like there was a little bit more that needed to happen with Telemachus first. That's just my personal thing. Now we come to my interpretation of Odysseus. I am so excited. I was like up until 2 a.m. last night writing all of this shit down, but I'm excited. Let's go. So Nolan took on a pretty epic epic, I didn't even think of that. A pretty epic challenge in having to fit an entire Greek epic in 3 hours. And in doing so, he made some pretty significant changes to the narrative of the story. But I don't think it was just to fit it in 3 hours. I think it was to revitalize the morals and lessons that Homer's epic was trying to portray for his audience. So in Homer's epic, The Odyssey teaches resilience, and the same sort of value is being portrayed in Nolan's film as well. So the common thread is resilience in humanity. Now, what I would say makes them different is sort of falls into two categories. First off, in Homer's epic, Odysseus's journey strips back the layers that are very specific to his archetype as this like cunning strategic soldier under Agamemnon. So the characteristics that a soldier has to have, strips them back through this immense punishment for his hubris, this divine intervention to get to the core of who Odysseus is. It's basically trying to figure out what is Odysseus's point in returning back to Ithaca. Is it to revel in the glory? Is it to celebrate his victory at Troy and his strategy paying off with the whole Trojan horse thing? No. He ends up realizing, and he even articulates this to Eumaeus in the novel, in the Greek epic. He says, he admits that he was so obsessed with that idea of like glory, and he has come to realize that he really does miss Penelope, Telemachus, and his role in the chain of being as the king of Ithaca. So basically, Homer's epic serves to strip back the superficial layers of Odysseus to reveal his true desire to return home, which is to be back with his family and be back in his mortal station. So now let's mirror this in Nolan's film. While Homer's epic serves to peel back those superficial layers and produce the core of Odysseus, I feel that Nolan's film adds more layers. While trying to pinpoint exactly why Odysseus wants to return home, Nolan adds these layers to sort of prescribe some meaning, some sort of foundation for Odysseus's behavior, and that exact thing or exact factor is his desire for control. Even Calypso mentions this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in depth later. He really wants to control everything. After they finish wrapping up at Troy, Eurylochus tells Odysseus that Agamemnon is heading west, and Odysseus basically says, we're not doing that, we're gonna go south, we're gonna get home faster than Agamemnon, trust me, I got this. He wants to control the way back, he wants to control sort of the way that his men go, the journey that they take. And he happens to both lose his way and the trust of his men. And that's where he sort of has to confront that desire for control. So that's the first category. It's basically, are we stripping back Odysseus or are we adding more layers? And they're sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum between Homer's epic and Nolan's film. The other difference is what accompanies the resilience that is being examined. In Homer's epic, the factor that sort of adds on as a motivation for Odysseus's resilience is anger. Athena constantly sort of perpetuates the suitors to be more irritating, more angry, and really makes sure that Odysseus doesn't reveal himself too early in her sense, to let the anger fester. Because, like I said before, those aversive, strong emotions, it's in that heightened rage that Odysseus can sort of realize why he's having any rage in the first place. Why does the suitor's behavior make him so angry? He realizes that he can only generate these strong emotions because he has such a strong tie to something greater and bigger than himself. Penelope, Telemachus, Ithaca. He values those things so much, and to see it be taken away from him really gets him to understand how much he valued those things in the first place. Nolan's film doesn't really show anger, I would say, as the main motivator for Odysseus's resilience. It's guilt. Odysseus's guilt humanizes him to such a massive extent that we can really empathize and understand why he does certain things, and we, the modern audience, can appreciate the immense scope of the narrative. You know, when we think of a Greek epic and they say this whole story happened over like decades, we're like, yeah, that makes sense as a Greek epic. But to see it be sort of played out in front of us, we can appreciate the length of the story because of how guilt-ridden Odysseus is. And it sort of goes back to why he's kind of flitting about with this purpose of wanting to go back. He has that resilience for sure, because he wants to survive and he wants his men to survive with him, but he feels extremely responsible for everything that happens. And that exact responsibility is questioned so many times. Athena questions him, Calypso questions him. So alongside his desire for control, he is riddled with guilt. Now, the differences between the epic and Nolan's film, I think, can be attributed to the contextual bounds of both creators. Homer's epic, he's obviously writing, or, well, not really writing, this was a poem, so he would have been speaking this, but he's creating this, or relaying these stories in a time where Greek mythology mainly was used to sort of teach humans lessons, morals. It was to show sort of the role of the gods, establish this hierarchy, with gods at the top, obviously, but with gods having the power to orchestrate fate and to have that control, and humans or mortals as being significantly below that. And the epic certainly establishes that. It establishes that by stripping back Odysseus to reveal his true desires. It shows anger as this motivator because the wrath of the gods is sort of mirrored in Athena orchestrating that anger in Odysseus as a mortal to motivate him to remember his resilience. Now, coming to Nolan's film, and I would say this is a common thread between quite a lot of his films, and he's obviously making these films in a time where we really appreciate the psychological and like human kind of backstories of characters. We like to engage with the complexities and niches of characters. Like in the modern world, we much rather appreciate a character that makes us uncomfortable and have to confront things because, like, in our heads, when we approach movies, we want to like the main character. And when we see unlikable behaviors, it's of course uncomfortable, but we kind of like to grapple with that. And that's what Nolan can do so fantastically. And he certainly achieves this with the changes that he makes to Homer's narrative. And the representation of Odysseus with more sort of desire for control, which is a very modern thing with social media, with the way we present ourselves, with language, with propaganda, controlling our images and controlling our fate, especially in a secular world as well, is very important to us. And hence why that's a value that's sort of championed and portrayed and examined so closely in the film. But also that guilt and that feeling of responsibility, that's such a human thing. And to see it be played out so beautifully is so important to a modern audience. So these are sort of my main like interpretations of the film, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about the actual changes that Nolan made. And for me, it's two very stark differences. So I'm going to start off with the first one, which I think is the one that most people will be able to sort of identify, and it's the fact that parts of the Trojan War, specifically the Trojan horse arc, was included in the film. And I thought this was interesting because the Odyssey only briefly mentions the Trojan War, and actually it's in Virgil's Aeneid that the fall of Troy is at all detailed. So I thought it was an interesting choice to include this in the film, and it was obviously in sort of scattered flashbacks at the start, but it was very integral to, I'd say, the second half of the story. So firstly, the film sort of establishes the point of being in Troy at the first place, which is information that you'd kind of need from the Iliad. So it sort of saves you the trouble of having to know that in detail. Basically, it just says that under the guise of trying to get Helen for Menelaus and sort of all of that, it's mainly for Agamemnon's ambition and wanting to sort of like spread and take Troy. Now, Odysseus, renowned as a soldier for his cunning and his strategy, he's the one who comes up with the Trojan horse idea in the first place. So his big idea is to pop everybody into the horse. The Trojans will accept it as a gift, and they'll be able to enter Troy, because the whole point of stopping them from getting into Troy is that their walls are like impenetrable. It's an impenetrable fortress. So this is their like smart way of getting inside without having to sort of sacrifice energy and like resources and men fighting to get inside Troy. So we all know that the Trojan horse like worked, and we also see this in the film working. And you'd think because this is Odysseus's big idea and it worked, he'd be chuffed about it, so pleased. But the second half of the film reveals that he's not at all. He's horrified with the fact that he has openly defied Zeus's law because he gave a gift to the people, and he used that gift and exploited it to orchestrate mass pain and suffering. So in the scene in sort of the pretty much the end of the film when he's talking to Penelope but he's disguised as a beggar, he's able to verbally articulate what was stifling that journey of coming back home. What was stifling the resilience? It was the guilt that he suffered through having transgressed one of the most important parts of his culture, which is Zeus's law. So it's not only that hubristic desire to control everything, and it's why he went a different way from Agamemnon and all of that. Above that desire for control, and sort of stemming from that desire for control, is the guilt that he's faced with. Now, another thing that I liked with including the arc of the Trojan horse and what I briefly mentioned earlier was Sinon's character. And Sinon both acted as a medium to portray Odysseus's desire for control, but also a source of the guilt. So one of the first scenes of the film is Sinon guarding the horse, and then he very aggressively and graphically sort of gets attacked by Trojan soldiers. So he guards the horse, and he, with his dying breath, conveys that it's a gift. So it's an offering to Athena, so that the Trojan people will take it in with them. But the sad thing is that Sinon dies not knowing the plan. And this is revealed later when he and Odysseus speak in the underworld. Sinon had no idea what was going on. He believed that he was completely alone. And more depressingly, he believed that he didn't really contribute anything to the fall of Troy. There was no honor. He didn't die in a battle or anything like that. He didn't die defeating anybody. He didn't die defending his territory or any other soldiers. He was shot by some arrows into the back of a wooden horse. And we also see that he was the son of a servant, so it's not like he was living the high life at home. This was extremely important to him, that he would come home with glory, and if he didn't come home, which he mentions to Odysseus, to tell his father of the things that he did. Now, in the underworld, when they're having this conversation and Sinon reveals that he had no idea what the plan was, Odysseus attempts to justify his decision to lie to Sinon, because it was his idea to not tell him. Odysseus basically says that, I lied to you, Sinon, because I needed you to believe that we were giving a gift. I needed you to believe in the plan. So in justifying his decision to lie to Sinon, Odysseus reveals that he needs to control every single thing because of the predictability that comes with that. When he controls everything and he knows the truth, he can predict people's responses and he can control their behavior. Basically, what this does for us is it gives us a little bit more insight. It adds another layer to Odysseus's cunning, deception. The foundation of his cunning is deception. And deception as the form of his cunning is shown in various other examples. And this is one that's not really in the Odyssey. But basically, the Achaean corps needed to find Achilles, the great warrior, but he was disguised as a woman in somewhere else because his mother was worried for him. So Odysseus and his crew came to that kingdom and brought a bunch of gifts and weapons and sort of displayed them in front of the king's daughters and Achilles, who was disguised as a woman who was there. And then he made his crew, outside of the palace, make a bunch of noises pretending as if an enemy was attacking, and Achilles instinctively took one of the weapons and armed himself and was ready to fight. So he deceived Achilles into giving up his disguise. So seeing this play out with Sinon really stamps that in, especially because that story is not from the Odyssey, so we can really further have some clarity as to Odysseus's characteristic of cunning. And it's Sinon's response to this justification and explanation from Odysseus that transforms Sinon's character from sort of a catalyst of being able to understand Odysseus's desire for control to a source of his guilt. Sinon finds no solace in being told that he was the key to the Trojan victory at all, because his father died in poverty, he died not knowing anything, and he died alone, and he doesn't find any joy or, as I said, solace in knowing that he was the key to the victory. And without revealing too much, because it's just a lot to go through, but Antinous was supposed to take care of Sinon's father back home. And Odysseus said, Sinon, come with me, Antinous will take care of your father. And Antinous did not do that, obviously, the greedy bastard. So Sinon learns in, the underworld that his father was not taken care of. And he expresses this to Odysseus. And Odysseus basically has to reconcile with the failure of his cunning. He continued to be deceptive because of the success rate. And now that success rate has had a significant dip because a very trusted soldier, a soldier that put his trust in Odysseus, it didn't come to fruition. So that's where the source of guilt comes from. He's being confronted with what he thinks is his defining characteristic. This cunning, strategic soldier is the reason why Athena kind of latches onto him as the goddess of war and strategy. She sort of appreciates that from Odysseus, but he's starting to realize that this is where his guilt is coming from. And Odysseus promises to honor Sinon's death when he returns, and that's where you can really start to see the resilience be shaped by his guilt and that responsibility he feels. So now moving on to probably one of the one of the lesser known changes, which is that Nolan did not include I call them Phoenicians. I'm not sure that I'm saying this correctly. I'm going to go with Phaeacians. He gets rid of the Phaeacians. So in Homer's epic, at the very start, Athena sort of appeals to Zeus in a council of a bunch of gods and basically is like, hasn't Odysseus suffered enough at this point? Like, can we not just let him go? And Zeus sends Hermes to tell Calypso, you need to let him go, which she begrudgingly does, and gives Odysseus a ship. And Odysseus is very suspicious. He does not trust Calypso at all because the gods have already treated him so badly for how many decades now? And Calypso has held him captive for so many years that he's just like, why are you letting me go? This is very suspicious. But he takes it. And this Zeus's decision was not made with Poseidon's approval. So when Poseidon sees that, oh, you're out and about, you're doing great, you're sailing home despite blinding my son, you're done. He conjures up a tempest, shipwreck happens, and Odysseus washes up on the shore of the Phaeacians. The king's daughter takes him to the king and queen. They offer him hospitality, and they ask to hear his story. And he tells his story to the Phaeacians. Now, this part is actually crucial to Homer's whole purpose of showing anger as coming alongside resilience, because there is a part of the Phaeacian kind of arc of the story where while Odysseus is taking rest because he's literally just been in a shipwreck, the king's son, they're all playing like sports and stuff outside because the bard was singing about the Battle of Troy and Odysseus started crying. He was like, please, I cannot take this shit anymore. Just do some sports, do something. So they're playing sports, and the king's son is like, hey, like, you look really muscular and stuff. Like, why don't you just give it a go? And Odysseus is like, no, thank you. I'm recuperating. I have to leave for a journey soon. I'm good. And he keeps like politely declining. And then the king's son is like, oh, I get it. Like, he's a flop. He can't do it. That's why he's a loser. And Odysseus gets so pissed off and angry that he takes a massive disc and just like throws it really fucking far, and nobody can see where it landed. It was that far, which honestly, I get that. I am so motivated by spite. You and me are the same, king. But Odysseus's anger comes from the fact that, you know, he's not allowed to recuperate. He's not allowed to take the opportunity to revel in the hospitality given by the king and queen of the Phaeacians. He sort of, in doing so, he might injure himself, and there's like maybe further delay in him getting home. Like, that anger really comes from, it's not to show off or anything. It is kind of a little bit to put the prince in his place. But that anger is another opportunity for him to reimagine and remember why he has any resilience in the first place and why he feels that it's so important to go back home. Now, in Nolan's version, no such island, no such people exist. He does not go to the Phaeacians, and he sort of ends his punishment still on Calypso's island, and he recalls his story to Calypso. But in Homer's epic, he remembers everything 100%. In Nolan's film, he's like struggling to remember, so he's sort of trying to recall his stories to Calypso on the island. But I think having him sort of struggle with the memory and forcing himself to remember these things on Calypso's island, it allows for this massive self-evaluation for Odysseus. Whereas in the epic, he's not really evaluating himself as much in like recalling his story. He evaluates himself in being angered, in finding the strong emotions and realizing why he has such a strong emotions. That's where he gets that self-evaluation from. It's rather just recalling his tale and sort of expressing what's happened in Homer's version. But in Nolan's version, he in recollecting his story, he's able to understand more about himself. He's able to pinpoint exactly the emotions that drive his behavior. He's able to understand exactly the intentions behind his decisions that he makes, and he understands and sort of reconciles with the fact that it's more complex and larger than any of the like strategic cunning archetype than he could have ever imagined. And while, like, I would have appreciated a scene with the Phaeacians and some sort of like funny bit where Odysseus gets very angry and acts out of spite, I think what maybe prompted Nolan to make this decision of having the self-realization, evaluation, and remembrance of his story happen with Calypso is that it's more understandable to a modern audience, because to me, it kind of felt like exposure therapy. It was kind of like Odysseus was in a clinic and Calypso was like his therapist, getting him to recall these memories and really sit with them and understand what they can do for him. That self-reflection is just much more resonant with a modern audience, and I really did appreciate that at the end of the day. And it's through that self-reflection that he's able to recognize the transgressions that he made. So whether that be the whole thing that was happening with the Trojan horse and defiling Zeus's law, it could have been exploiting the trust of Sinon, it could have been leading the men astray. And Calypso then gives him the raft and he trusts her, but he trusts her because Calypso says a couple of lines about the need for control. Basically, what she says is that Odysseus needs to relinquish control. He needs to let it go. He needs to understand that the biggest transgression of his was that desire for control that's led to sort of maybe these more eventful transgressions. And when he does this and he lets the waves take him, and I'm going to say it's Poseidon because he is the god of the sea. He's letting the gods reorchestrate his story and kind of reorient himself again. And then he finds himself on Ithaca's shore and he's able to sort of go through the rest of the narrative. So I think I'll wrap it up there. But this was just such an incredible film to see. I did watch it in IMAX. And I think my biggest gripe with the film is the fact that I can't like easily see it again. I would love to go tomorrow. If you gave me the opportunity right now, pack up your bags and go to an IMAX theater. Best believe I'm packing my bags. So it was just such an amazing experience. I think having that sort of personal connection to the story of the Odyssey, having done it in high school, and it's very special to me. Reading it before, really trying to like focus in the theater on analyzing it. It was just such an amazing experience for me, and I can't imagine what the experience was for the actors on set. So yeah, I think we'll leave it at there. Comment down below any of the findings you guys had, any of the thoughts that you had, if you agree or even disagree with any of the things that I've said. What were your 3 favorite things, your 3 least favorite things? And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.